So I've lived in Los Angeles for a long time, about 15 years. And one thing that happens a lot is um, people would say to me, "Oh my gosh, Los Angeles has just gone crazy. The protests, or maybe it's a riot, or maybe it's some sort of, the BLM was another big one." And just people would see things happening on social media and in the news about Los Angeles, and they would think that the whole place was a complete hellhole. And the reality is, when you're living in a place, like many of us living in Los Angeles, just simply didn't notice a lot of the stuff that was circulating all over the news and all over social media. And the point of that, of why I'm bringing this up, is we often are inundated with a lot of imagery on social media and the news that we're seeing over and over and over again. So we think things are worse than they actually are. Or in some circumstances, it's the other way around. Maybe things are made to appear better than they actually are. And it takes really great independent journalists actually going on the ground and actually looking around and saying, this is what I'm actually seeing, not the clickbait type stuff that we see on social media, where we're inundated with imagery after, video after video after video of a crazy riot or crazy violence or crazy smashing up of buildings. I will say during BLM, it was a little bit crazier in LA than I had seen. I mean, most of the stuff that's happened in LA over the last 15 years, I did not notice. Really? I mean, sure, maybe I'd see a protest here and there, but it really wasn't as disruptive as social media or the news made it look. BLM was a little bit different. There was definitely a lot of smashing of Santa Monica. I mean, that was kind of shocking to see. But for the most part, I think we're inundated with a lot of highly charged emotional footage, and it's meant to get our eyeballs. And it's not exactly always the reality on the ground. Well, with us is somebody who is really great at getting on the ground and actually seeing what's actually really truly happening. And right now, what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. is highly militarized Washington, D.C. Now, I'm not in Washington, D.C., so I haven't been there. So all I get is the images on social media, just like you get, which is this place I mean, Donald Trump has turned it into this dystopian kind of, nightmare, and it's just military everywhere, and people are being hustled for their IDs, and maybe that's the truth, or maybe it isn't. And maybe most people just aren't noticing anything at all, or maybe everybody's frightened because military's on every single corner. Well, Ford Fisher is with us, and he is a primary source documentarian and the editor in chief of News to Share, an independent platform using raw footage and live stream to cover political activism. And his work has been featured in Oscar, Emmy, and Golden Globe winning films. And what I like about Ford is he's always on the ground, really truly capturing what's really happening. And in fact, well, Ford, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've basically been in DC each day of this week, except for one where I was helping my wife as a teacher and I was helping her set up her classroom. But otherwise, trying to document, what this has actually looked like, how it's actually
Yeah.
changed since Trump's directive on Monday.
Before we talk about that, weren't you heavily censored? Didn't you get ripped off of YouTube after you were just there filming January 6th, right? And they
Yeah,
just and then you were just filming it. I mean, you're hard. I don't think you're ever on. Are you on camera ever? I mean, most of the stuff I've seen of
barely.
you, you're okay.
Yeah, so for the most part, what I go out and do is just take raw video of whatever the situation is or live stream. Often I don't even appear in my live streams. In general, you don't see me in my footage on my YouTube channel. So me doing an appearance like this is something I will, gladly do for a show like yours, but it's not the format of my own work. Um,
Right,
in
right.
the case of
You're
January
just getting
6th,
footage. I mean, you
yeah,
go out there and you're just filming the reality of what it is, and people can then make up their own mind based on what they're seeing.
that's exactly right. So in the case of January 6th, what YouTube had taken issue with was that I had raw video showing the reaction of the crowd as Trump gave his sort of infamous 70-minute speech ahead of what ended up being the riot at the United States Capitol. And YouTube's argument was that because Trump claimed that the election had been stolen and my video as raw footage did not dispute, and to be clear, it didn't agree with. It just didn't have a perspective. It's just here's raw footage of what actually happened in DC on a highly consequential day in history. And YouTube's point was if you're not actively countering the president's narrative about this or anybody else's narrative who claims that the election was stolen, then you're ipso facto endorsing it. That your video
Yeah.
didn't include sufficient countervailing views was the way that they described it. And so they've since changed that policy. Um, and I think that that's in part because they did it right before Trump started running for president again, because Trump would be talking about this subject, and presumably it would have required the censorship of a now incoming and now serving president of the United
Right.
States again.
Right. Okay. So you've been in DC every day since the troops have been deployed, since the militarization. Okay, so let's talk about this. Um,
Mhm.
First of all, what are you when you arrived, you first traveled, you said, to DC for about 6 hours looking around, looking for this National Guard, the federal agents. What did you see?
Yeah, so on Wednesday night, I basically traveled all around DC, both on foot, and actually buses are kind of a pretty good way to just have a roving view, covering a lot of ground. And I basically didn't see anything out of the ordinary. There was one report on Wednesday night that federal agents were in a specific area, basically making a vehicular checkpoint, and had managed to get one arrest out of that. That's the images that's on your screen now.
Okay.
That was the only report I basically had of something like that happening on Wednesday, and it had basically cleared out just before I got there. My understanding is that there was sort of an impromptu protest, not an organized activist thing, but just this is a fairly populated, lots of restaurants and bars and things, and people basically just started yelling at the law enforcement who were doing this stuff, and basically they left. But for the most part, it seems like the streets haven't really meaningfully changed all that much. So I can say also that the National Guard has been this really big. I mean, it's kind of like what you were talking about in your intro. The National Guard has been this big story that if you watch, Fox or CNN or whatever, you are going to see these images. And I've taken some of this type of image of National Guardsmen, driving, like, oh, look, big, big vehicle, right? Soldiers standing around. But they've kind of been placed in these really highly visible locations, and for not super long periods of time. So the particular
Hmm.
image that you're showing right now, this is in front of Union Station, which is a very central location to Washington D.C. Right? It's how people arrive and leave the city by train, and so you're going to have a lot of tourists and things like that. It's also quite close to the United States Capitol, and basically they were just standing around. And while I'm sure that if they physically witnessed an assault or something like that, I would guess that they would intervene. Um, it's kind of hard to imagine how that translates into an actual change in policing. I think if you were to watch the
Hmm.
mainstream media, you might almost be left with the impression that there's just soldiers everywhere, that there's soldiers on every street corner. And I think it's almost hard to visually document, because while on the one hand, of course, I'm going to go and film the soldiers where they are, it also would look really stupid if I was going and taking video of, look, here is an entire street without soldiers on it, right? It wouldn't really be meaningful footage. But the point is that on the ground, they're not everywhere. You kind of have to specifically be looking for them to find them.
So you don't feel like Washington, DC is any more heavily militarized than it had been in the past?
It's certainly not more militarized than in the aftermath of January 6th, right? I would point out that it's not super unprecedented in the past few years, just in the sense that following J6, and particularly through the inauguration, there were as many as 25,000 National Guard troops occupying Washington, D.C. During that period of time, I actually filmed inside the U.S. Capitol, where you had soldiers sleeping on the hallways there. And that was a moment that was pretty controversial, as a lot of conservatives felt that it was unnecessary and that it was sort of a misuse or a disservice to the military to do it. Of course, a lot of people on the left would say this was such a severe threat that it was essentially necessary. But just by contrast, my understanding is that we're talking about hundreds of soldiers that have been called to DC and activated, according to Trump's recent directive, as opposed to 25,000. Right. So
Okay.
this could be no more than 4% of how it looked around Biden's inauguration.
Okay. So you're saying that there's obviously this footage that's circulating around online of, a lot of we're seeing on in these videos, a lot of National Guard and troops or whatever. But I mean, obviously, I mean, if you think about it, most people aren't going to walk around with a camera filming nothing, right?
Right,
They're going to
exactly.
film the actual, where are they? Okay, here's the tanks. Here's video of the tanks. And so all we keep seeing online is a lot of videos of tanks, a lot of videos of guys walking around patrolling neighborhoods, a lot of guys, we're seeing this because people aren't just going to film a random street with nothing on it and nothing
Yes.
happening. So we don't
Yeah.
get the full picture.
Yeah, I mean, another point on that would just be on Tuesday, a colleague of mine, Scootercaster, went and was able to get footage of National Guardsmen on the National Mall. And my understanding from later reporting that occurred is that basically the National Guardsmen set up there and took photographs and left, and so their
Ah,
total time that they were on the National Mall was just a few hours. But I've been to the National Mall all across it several times since that incident occurred to sort of see if that was a replicatable image, essentially if the National Guard would show up again and be there. And to my knowledge, they essentially haven't. And I
huh.
understand that they're moving around and so forth, right? And so like it's not like they're always revealing their position, or that it would be really easy to find them necessarily. But again, the point is that finding them right now is more like where's Waldo.
Okay. Are you seeing a lot more FBI than National Guard?
Right. So similarly, there have been images circulated, and it is a true thing that's happening that there have been federal agents that Trump has basically assigned onto the unusual duty of doing policing on the street. To people who wouldn't
Right.
necessarily know about this, Washington, D.C. already has a myriad of different policing agencies. So you have the Metropolitan Police Department, who, other than this week, is historically in commanded by the police chief who's under the mayor, right? That's the chain of command. The local police is MPD. And then you have a lot of policing agencies that are attached to kind of federal jurisdictions that surround different things in DC. For example, the Secret Service is responsible for the protection of the president and vice president and all the things around it. So you see a lot of Secret Service at the White House, for example. You have the United States Parks Police, who, as you might guess, is mostly dealing with parks. You have the United States Capitol Police, who are mostly dealing with Capitol Hill. But it's a little unusual to see FBI agents, DEA agents, sort of doing day to day, walking the street type patrolling. There, of course, was one federal agent who had another federal, it turned out, was another DOJ employee who threw a sandwich at him. And this has
Right.
kind of almost become the viral emblematic image of what's been
Well,
going on this
he's
week.
he's the symbol of the deep state, according to Pam Bondi. I mean, you realize that, right? I mean, that was a huge, huge thing because that was the deep state throwing that sandwich.
I apparently all I see is it's fed on fed violence. We know that much.
Okay. Fed on fed violence. Okay.
um,
Okay.
and I mean, they
So
made
you
such a big deal
yeah.
out of that person was initially arrested, and my understanding is that after they were released on their own recognizance, pending charges, they then went and arrested them again. So I mean, they're really getting a lot out of the sandwich incident. But
Okay.
as far as feds patrolling, again, similarly, after looking around for hours, it was very difficult, and in my case, impossible. I failed to actually find any of them. I am now aware
Okay.
of where that vehicular checkpoint had taken place. That was in the U Street neighborhood, and my understanding is that that's been sort of a hot spot. So it's actually, I can say that it's my intention tonight and tomorrow night to probably focus my efforts in looking for this kind of thing around there.
Mm,
I have also seen some cell phone video showing basically federal agents patrolling in Southeast DC in actually more high crime areas. Um,
right.
I think it
Well, that's
really
what I'm
remains
wanting
to
to
be seen
know.
what impact that's going to have.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, the whole point was we have to drive down crime. So you wouldn't have realistically, I mean, if you're going to do this and mean it, you wouldn't put all of these National Guard or FBI agents in areas where there's lower crime. You would go to the high crime areas. And that would be kind of these inner city neighborhoods, I guess, in Washington, D.C. And I've driven through some of them and they're pretty darn scary. I'm not going to lie. And I mean, I've been living in LA for 15 years and I've never driven through a neighborhood in LA as scary as the ones I've driven through in Washington, DC. But that, because I just don't ever see in LA, we don't see like swarms of people out kind of loitering in the streets, kind of hanging out, looking like they're looking for trouble, like, I mean, maybe certain neighborhoods. I don't know. I mean, that's the feeling that I've gotten the few times I've gone through some, what I would say, sketchy neighborhoods in DC. So I would think that that's where they would send these guys, right? That they would like go into those neighborhoods in particular and say, what do you, and kind of harassing people that are just sitting around. I mean, when I would drive through these neighborhoods, they were just sitting there. I mean, it's not like it's not like I witnessed anybody committing any crime. It was a sight I hadn't seen in like Los Angeles, for example, where it just looked like, at any minute a fight could break out, or any minute somebody could just get shot out here like this. It just looks like it's prime for it, but nothing was actually going on. And so, of course,
Mhm.
you would have these, and in most days, nothing does go on. People are just sitting around, and why not? They're kind of, I guess, maybe socializing. I don't know what it is they're doing, but, and there's nothing wrong with that. So what are these federal agents doing, right? I mean, but then are they there, and are they going to actually stop the crime when they see the crime?
Yeah, so I mean, I've seen a couple of cell phone videos that have been recorded basically in in the southeast area of DC. Again, to people who don't know, DC is kind of broken up into 8 wards, and wards 7 and 8 are where the types of crime is highly concentrated that Trump is citing when he talks about DC as compared to other nations' capitals throughout the world has sort of what he considers to be an unacceptable crime rate, murder rate, that sort of thing. Most of that is concentrated into some
I mean,
particular
it's hidden
areas.
away. I mean, if you just go to DC, like I have many times just to be in DC, visit DC or whatever, you never go to those neighborhoods. You'd have to like go, you have to have a reason to go to those
You'd
neighborhoods, I
either
think.
you'd either be there because you're a resident or because you have some purpose to be there, essentially.
Right. Right.
But and to be clear, there is still, of course, crime that can happen in the more downtown areas, such as I know that a big part of what President Trump has cited in terms of why he's doing this is the assault against the Doge employee who went by the moniker Big Balls. I don't
Right.
my my
Well,
understanding
he
is that
was
that
he was
has
actually trying to rescue somebody who was being assaulted. So he did
Mhm.
have big balls at that time, it turned out. His moniker fits him. But yeah, he was like helping rescue somebody who was being assaulted.
Yeah,
And
I
then
mean,
he
to
got
be honest, I
assaulted.
don't know exactly the details of that situation, but my understanding is that that did happen closer to Capitol Hill as compared to a sort of concentrated high crime area. And so, I mean, I do think that there's sort of an almost an aesthetic element to it, which is Trump saying, I have an example of something that gets me angry, and here I am doing something about it. I think it really remains to be seen what actual impact that will have on the street to the extent that people are murdering each other in Southeast DC. I mean, it stands to reason that they're not going to do that when there's highly visible, agents right next to them. But again, it's not like that's so heavily concentrated that that's sort of all the time, right? If it is difficult for me to find the change in policing style on the ground, it is also difficult to imagine that that's changing kind of the layout or the
Yeah.
calculation for those who would be committing crimes on the street.
Well, and also I think that the tone, I mean, I think what's upset, and we'll get into this, the protests and people on the left, but what's upset
Mhm.
people about this is it's upset a few different groups, not just people on the left, but also libertarian loving people who are like, why are we militarizing our main cities? And why are we talking about militarizing more of our cities when we wanted less government, not more big brother control over it? But it's kind of like the reasoning behind it. The reason is, well, we just don't want DC to be ugly, right? So we got to clean up all the homeless. We don't want we want people to visit the nation's capital and go to the sites and feel safe. But really, as we're talking about, the crime is mostly concentrated in these 2 districts. And
Mhm.
the real conversation should be, we need to march into these neighborhoods that are inner city neighborhoods in all of our major cities, and we're going to crack down on crime in those neighborhoods, because innocent people are living in these neighborhoods wanting to live good lives, and they're living around violence. And we need to prevent, and protect those Americans living in these inner cities. But they're not framing it like we need to protect the Americans living in these inner cities. If they could contain it to the inner cities and like literally build a fence around them, right? And just be like, you guys commit crime, but stay in your area. Don't come out. Then that's what they would do. I mean, I don't think that they have any real intention of saving the people that are actually, where the crime's happening and to whom the crime is actually happening, which is inside of these inner cities. Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. It is free for you to watch. Again, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, KimIversonShow.com. See you there.